Section 1 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. The Old Yuma Trail, Part 2, by W.J. McGee, Vice President of the National Geographic Society. The distinctive part of the Old Yuma Trail lies between Sonoita, longitude 112 degrees 50 minutes, and Sierra Gila, longitude 114 degrees 5 minutes, the southwesternmost range of Arizona. Between these points, it nearly coincides with the international boundary. East of the old-time place of corn, there are several tributary trails. The ancient and modern pilgrimage path leads westward from Baboquivari Peak, longitude 111 degrees 40 minutes, to a capricious watering place at the southern end of Santa Rosa Mountains, longitude 112 degrees 30 minutes, and thence on to Sonoita. The early Mexican route led through Magdalena and Santa Ana, and thence through Altar and over the plains to the Santa Rosa water. The later Mexican approach, afterward adopted by many American pioneers, can be traced through Fronteras to the old mission of Tubac, and thence through Arivaca and Sasabi to a practically permanent water at the southern end of Sierra Baboquivari, Pozo Verde, and on over the plains, now intersected by the boundary to Santa Rosa and Sonoita, while an alternative American approach lies through the ancient city of Tucson and by Coyote Spring at the northern end of Sierra Baboquivari to the main trail anywhere east of Santa Rosa, and thence to Sonoita. From this oasis westward, there is but a single way to Tinajas Altas near the southern end of Sierra Gila, but there the tracks diverge, one distributary leading down the northeastern side of the range to Rio Gila, another through a neighboring pass, and thence directly northwestward to Yuma. With a third, theoretically at least, the way is practically impassable save by well-equipped expeditions, across the drifting sands stretching to Rio Colorado at the point touched by the Arizona-Sonora boundary. The Santo Domingo of today stands on the site of the wooden cross erected by the Padres over 2 centuries ago. It is a feudal Mexican village of the type prevailing in the remoter districts, owned and governed with constant fealty to the distant but beloved Presidente and the much-adored Carmencita, who is to Mexico what Victoria was to Britain, by Don Cipriano Ortega. It comprises a chief residence, a habitation for the Aduana, Customs Office, a smaller house occupied by a minor branch of the family, a church with horseshoe-shaped bell arch, and 3 or 4 shops and stables, all of adobe, flat-roofed, and 1 low story high. Besides, there is an abandoned ore mill of 6 steam-driven arrastres, while 6 Papago Indian huts form the customary lower town. The rancho is large, skillfully irrigated, and so productive that corrals and sheds are filled with vigorous stock and abundant grain, hay, and barley. The nearest low spur of Sierra Sonoita better attests the antiquity of the settlement than the few houses and inhabitants, for there the evangelists and their civil successors have laid 7 or 8 generations of their dead in cross-marked sepulchres, while hard by lies the much more populous cemetery of the Papago dependents, those of the pagan dead in the form of a key house, but built of stones and strewn with the bones of sacrificed horses, those of the converts in similar form, though built of earth and decently marked with crosses outlined in pebbles. At both Residence and Aduana, the ethnological expedition was welcomed and supported by Don Bartolo Ortega in the temporary absence of the eldest brother, as well as by the local customs officer, Senor Garcias, the way having been made easy by the courteous provision of Mexican authorities. On the way westward, on November 15, 1900, a 6-mule wagon carrying all the casks and kegs of both Santo Domingo and Sonoita, besides a 1/4 load of hay and grain, set out on the old Yuma Trail under an arrangement with Don Bartolo to deliver water and feed in Tule Pass, 60-odd miles away, by the third evening. Next day, the 4-mule light wagon and the 4 saddle animals of the expedition were on the road betimes, crossing the sand wash of Rio Sonoita, a channel broad enough for the Ohio, deep enough for the Schuylkill, but dust dry from bank to bank. The way meandered over a cactus-dotted plain, simulating a vast alluvial deposit, but revealing its origin by sheet flood, carving in occasional projecting bosses of granite. Passing Monument 172, it swung a few yards north of the boundary to touch at Quito Baquito, the Papago village with 5 centuries behind it, and 2 adobe houses besides a half-dozen native huts within it. Here the entire white population, Mr. M.G. Levy, merchant, mine owner, justice of the peace, and deputy sheriff, was avidly hospitable, the native residents attentive, as became the unusualness of the event, and the side barrels and half-dozen canteens of the outfit were soon filled with a slightly alkaline, yet palatable and wholesome water from the spring. Quito Baquito lies amid the southeasternmost foothills of a sierra bearing the name of Spring and Village. A dozen miles away, the range divides, a spur setting off southward to form Cerro Salado, or Sierra de la Salado, and the trail veers partly to avoid this spur, partly to touch the last water near its tip. Beyond Quito Baquito, the ancient trail grows impressive. True, the narrow stock path followed by the wagons is in large part new, but as well seen from the crest of Cerro Huerfano, the new track diverges from the old only because the old was so deep that it has become a storm-cut arroyo. Indeed, for miles, Rio Sonoita abandons the ancient sand wash during its brief spurts of activity to convert the wheel-worn way into a flood channel. Prehistoric sites and relics of the early Stone Age are sparsely scattered over the plain. The ruins of a Mexican rancho, with well and corral and acequias, lie 3 miles west of Quito Baquito, and there is an abandoned ganadero stock ranch at the last water 5 miles beyond, known commonly as agua dulce, from the alkaline sweetness of the water, properly as agua salada from its salinity. The agua is merely the small residuum of underflow and local seepage brought to the surface of the Sonoita sandwash by impervious ledges of Cerro Salado and their subterranean extension across the valley, and the banks and bottom are encrusted with frost-like efflorescences of mineral salts. The water is fair for stock, just potable for men. It is a resort for half-wild cattle and horses and burros ranging the sierras and valleys for 20 miles beyond. But the latest sign is that of Don Bartolo's outfit, whose casks and kegs were filled 24 hours earlier. Here we pitch a tentless camp, with the first graves of the old Yuma Trail on a low spur hard by. The sky is clear, though the air is heavy and warm, and Coyote, the wise one of Papago lore, creeps near to sing his rain song, a sleep-breaking wail well understood of the vaqueros. The sump of the Sonoita. The first faint dawn of the 17th is ushered by a slow sprinkle from low clouds, forming a fog bank halfway up the Cerro, but so light overhead that the brighter stars glimmer through, and blankets are hurriedly rolled and loaded. Breakfast is bolted, and the outfit is underway in the gray twilight. With sunrise, the floating fogs fade, revealing the entire salt pan in which Rio Sonoita comes to an end, a basin of a score square miles, bounded on the north by Cerro Salado and its footslopes, on the west by minor ranges running down from Sierra Pinacate, and on the southeast by a sheet flood slope studded with volcanic buttes and mesas, while the old valley opening southwestward to the Gulf stops at a dam of 100-foot dunes marking the margin of the Red Desert, a seaborne tide of sand slowly engulfing the lowlands of Sonora from Rio Colorado to Lobos Point. This is the sink of the Sonoita in the pioneers' vernacular, its evaporating vat in physical fact, After freshets, it is lake or morass according to the volume of the flood, and then bottomless mire for weeks. Now it is a Titan-patterned carpet of red, white, yellow, and black efflorescences, relieved by the greens of salt-enduring shrubbery on higher spots. On the hard-baked surface crust, the hoofs drum and the wheels rumble with a hollow reverberation more disturbing to animals than to men, albeit reminders to these of tragedies galore in the treacherous sump. A herd of wild burros see or scent the leading horseman from afar, and after deer-like stamps and snorts and other signals gather in a bunch, with dams and foals in the lead and males in the rear, to skim with amazing swiftness, recalling the wild asses of Arabia, down the rocky slopes and over the resounding playa obliquely across the trail toward the impassable sand dunes, while an occasional band of half-wild horses may be glimpsed lurking behind mesquite clumps or scurrying for more distant shelter. The trail leaves the Sonoita Basin about longitude 113 degrees 10 minutes and 10 miles south of the boundary. Thence it wanders northwestward over rocky footslopes, bending slightly to avoid isolated buttes and curving more sharply to cross arroyos for a dozen miles, to an imperceptible divide in the invisible frontier, where it enters a typical valley plain of southwestern Arizona. Just outside the basin, we overtake the supply outfit, which should have been 30 miles further on, and learn of the broken queen bolt and the long night ride by the Mexican to replace it, while the Indians stayed by the stock, and we foregather to revise plans, swallowing apprehensions in a cold bite as the rare clouds of Papagueria gather to break in noonday showers and dispel the darkest danger of the desert. After arranging a rendezvous where gaeta grass may be found, for all stock trails are now left behind, the lighter outfit pushes on to outspan in sight of Monument 178, longitude 113 degrees 20 minutes, the first dry camp on the old trail. Here sign of antelope and deer are seen, and the gaeta is recovering slowly from the overpasturage of the mid-century. Mr. Gill finds a curious aboriginal cache in a cavern of the volcanic butte on which the monument stands, and showers come and go throughout the night. Across playas and malpays. The second morning from Santo Domingo was cool and cloudy. Blankets and saddles are stiff with the wet, the animals fractious, but 3 miles of smooth going and a rising sun bring comfort with the passage through a congeries of granite picachos rising abruptly from the level plain, and the pass is a gateway into Tule Desert. The first quarter of this expanse alternates between bare playa and a lax thicket of creosote, lauria, growing in extraordinary luxuriance. Clumps 12 feet high and branches 15 feet long are common, while the silty floor is riven every few rods by giant shrinkage cracks, often a foot or more wide and a yard or two deep. Fortunately, the showers here have been light, yet the alkaline silt is tenacious mud, fetlock deep for the mules and twice fellow deep for the wagons. The next fraction of the valley is a tongue of the red desert, reaching in by the western end of Sierra Pinacate and stretching a dozen miles northward to lap the base of party-colored Sierra Pinta. For 5 miles the old trail, which was lost in the playas, reappears here and there as a deep worn way, partly filled and often obliterated by drifting sands, and the dead drag is the more dispiriting for the steady upgrade toward the Malpays belt dividing Tule Valley. This Malpays, theme of many a traveler's tale, forms a notable feature of the old route. It is a vast sheet of black lava stretching towards Sierra Pinta from a group of craters, and probably unseen fissures as well, a few furlongs or miles south of the roadway, but well so youthful in geologic sense that the principal lines and lobes of flowage and the rugged scarps of the margins remain distinct. The surface is weathered into a pavement of pebbles bedded below in light yellow sand, but polished above by a desert varnish of remarkable brilliance, and the pebbles are set so close that the varnished surfaces form a nearly continuous mirror miles in extent, reflecting light and heat with painful intensity. The Malpais belt forms a low mesa on which an occasional scrubby mesquite or saguaro, Cereus giganteus, or pitahaya, Cereus angomani, has found lodgment. It affords fine views of the Painted Range in the north, of the serrate crests and pointed peaks brought out by the afternoon sun in Tule Mountains, and especially of Sierra Pinacate, now falling into the rear on the left, and the last view serves to rectify the reports of the pioneers by showing that Pinacate is not a crater but a range, that the Malpais stops miles short of its nearer base, and that it rises from the Red Desert quite like other ranges of western Sonora, though to a loftier height than any neighbor. Through the polished pavement of black Malpais, the old trail is distinct as a line on a map. The larger pebbles and boulders have been thrown out of the way of wheels by generations of travelers, while the smaller are ground into the ashen sand, and at intervals not exceeding a few hundred rods, the bordering pavement is broken by cross-shaped pebble piles marking the journey's end, now of a youth, again of mother and child, elsewhere of 2 or 3 adult companions, but more commonly of the single traveler, as told vaguely by the size and form of the heap. All grim reminders that among the pioneers the Malpais was the favorite place for dying. A desert storm. The stock are breathed on the near edge of the Malpais amid passing showers, then pushed on, the later outfit gaining rapidly toward Tule Pass. Meantime, the clouds about the southeastern subrange of Sierra Tule grow dense, while those on neighboring crests lighten. Then the cloud mass veils the sub-Sierra to its base, and half an hour later sets slowly northeastward over Tule Valley toward the trail, so slowly that both outfits are across the Malpais and in the western half of the Red Desert tongue before the tempest strikes. A typical desert storm, though of exceptional severity, was this, and instructive in every aspect. While among the peaks the cloud bank was about 3,000 feet high, and flattened dome shape above, 5 or 6 miles in diameter at 2/3 of the height, and 3 miles across at the level of the plain, the rain lines seen in the lower third converging from both sides, and these proportions seemed to be maintained, save for slight flattening, as the mass drifted into the valley and grew in size. It was most orderly in behavior. Its rate of advance, after its clinging hold on the Sierra broke, was 8 or 10 miles an hour, and the roar of rain and wind on drifted sand and scattered mesquites was audible half an hour, ominous for half as long, before the storm was actually at hand. Steadily the rim of cloudbank pushed forward, passed overhead, and eclipsed the entire heavens save the northeastern eighth. Light sprinkles fell from it directly downward through still air at first, but grew heavier as they caught the northeasterly air drift, then rather suddenly, so quickly that prompt action was required to protect the wagon as the stock turned tail. The wind stiffened without changing direction, while the shower became a torrent, and 10 minutes later a 35-mile gale was driving the drops in a nearly horizontal sheet above the dune tops, while the temperature fell from some 70 degrees to about 35 degrees, and small hailstones formed apparently within a dozen feet of the ground. 10 minutes more, and the gale was down to a breeze, the torrent to a sprinkle. Then the rearward margin of the cloud bank drifted away before the continuing breeze, and the low swinging sun shone brightly. The cloud mass pursued its way towards Sierra Pinta, evidently meeting a misty cape already hung about its shoulders. With a conjunction there was much lightning and some audible thunder. Then the vapor bank spread along the range and either melted away or drifted on northeastward. During the 20 minutes of continuous pour, the precipitation was 1 1/4 or 1 1/3 inches, estimated from catchment and water pail, etc. Yet over the waste of drifted sand, not a rill was formed, not a puddle was produced, not even a watery surface was seen, save in the few slick spots, i.e., alkaline silt patches, of the cowboys. The sand simply swallowed the flood like a sponge and was visibly moist only to depths of 3 to 4.5 inches. The storm over, the outfit heads again toward the distant pass, though Moberly lifts his voice to tender, thrice over, in typical cowboy emphasis, a, quote, bet that them there fellers let the mules break the tongue when the storm come up on 'em, end quote. And a half hour later the Mexican gallops up on a bareback mule with toes locked inside the forelegs to verify the inference. So camp is made in a woodless spot, save for scattered creosote bushes, while Los Gringos turn back to make repairs and bring up the supply outfit to a point about longitude 113 degrees 33 minutes, 20 miles short of that specified in the contract with Don Bartolo. It is the third night stop and the second dry camp on the old trail, though drenched blankets and hourly showers belie the vernacular designation for desert camp. The way through Tule Pass. By daybreak of the 19th, the wind shifts from southwest to northwest and grows chill, while gray clouds drive toward the dawn and crowd before the rising sun in a fashion more typical of deserts than of vaporous lands, and feed and water are transferred to the lighter outfit, while the supply team is turned back towards Santo Domingo, with a douceur to driver and aide because they did no worse. The ancient trail forward is a deep furrow in the sands, and as these grade into the silts of the valley margin toward Tule Pass, the furrow becomes a series of sections of arroyos, normally setting obliquely across the trail, but diverted for rods or furlongs by the deeper cut of the wagonway. And within 5 miles, the arroyos bear marks of having run brim full for minutes or hours with the overflow from the Sierra on the south. Gradually, the way rises through sheet flood carved foot slopes and then winds among buttes and granite walls toward an ill-defined divide. Graves grow numerous again with the abundance of rocks to mark them. The year-old trail of an American on a shod horse and a Mexican on a shoeless beast forms a clear palimpsest over the 7-year-old tracks of the boundary parties. Sign of deer and mountain sheep and pairs and flocks abound in the gulches, while coyote paths, unseen in Tule Desert, reappear. The pass is a meadow-like expanse of coarse granitic sand filmed with scrubby creosote clumps. Here the trail divides, and a guidepost of sawn timber stands, solitary and incongruous, to attest observance of a territorial law by the road supervisor of Yuma County, and incidentally to indicate Tule well and advertise the name and wisdom of the last passer, the American horseman, and the feeling inscription, quote, Agua Salada, 75 miles. Go back and fill your canteen. G.O. Taylor, end quote. Thenceforward the way is freshened and the mules heartened by the year-old trail of the conscientious supervisor. Tule well, longitude 113 degrees 45 minutes, is a mile or two from the main trail. It is now a name on map and tongue, and a caving pit and rocky detritus with a barrel of liquid at the bottom, liquid even more saline than that of the Gulf, in addition to its overpowering flavor of copper salts and strong tinctures of sodden insects and drowned rodents, from which even the thirstiest horses turn in wry aversion. In the palmy days of the old Yuma Trail, this was a way station, as adobe ruins still proclaim. Before the range was overpastured, there was a slender flora which helped to hold moisture, and the water was made tolerable by constant draughts and renewals. Now it is but an echo and a delusion, if not a poison brew for the chance traveler. A league west of the old well and a mile from the main trail, there is a high tinaja water pocket, and the granite range running down from Blackhead Butte, Cerro de la Cabeza Prieta, in which water may be found by a hard climb in winter and spring or after local storms, but the chance is a desperate one during most of the year. Beyond the main amphitheater of Tule Pass, the trail winds among granite buttes, sierras, peaks, knife-edge crests, and bewildering variety and labyrinthine confusion. Gray and cream, pink and rosy walls of solid granite rise sheer from flat valley floors of crumbled granite. The way wanders through a 2-mile rincon, a great natural corral of granite walls in which a city might be housed against cyclone or armed invasion. Whole cubic miles of granite are constantly in sight, yet all this granite is but as a hand specimen of northwestern Sonora and adjacent Arizona. The Valley of Little Lettuce. 8 miles west of Tule Pass, the rugged mass of Tule Mountains falls away, first on the left and then on the right, giving place to zones of malpays which slope down to LiteratureProceedings Valley, and here again the ancient trail is a thread of yellow in a field of black. Here, too, the narrow cemetery of the old Yuma trail grows more populous, for here the desert is most drear and water most distant. The grave marks are too many to note, save the 30-foot circle of pebbles with a great pebble cross in the center recording the thirst death of a family of 7 who staked life on a demijohn of water which was accidentally broken. Captain Gayard pictures this cementeria and adds, quote, "The wagon tracks made when the poor Mexican drove his exhausted team to one side of the road were plainly visible 30 years afterward, and at the very spot still remain pieces of glass and wickerwork from the broken demijohn and the skulls of the 2 horses." End quote. The sun swings low as we pass this pathetic memorial and others on the desolate malpays, and as it sinks behind Sierra Gila, we push out a mile or 2 on the silty plain, longitude 113 degrees 55 minutes, and make the 3rd dry camp, where the team mules drank the last of the water, where ablution is not, and where the slender store of hay and grain comes to an end. But the blankets are still damp, and the night is chill, than which there are worse things in desert life. LiteratureProceedings Valley is named from an inconspicuous agave-like plant of 3 or 4 slender, straggling stipes a few inches high. It affects chiefly the roadway and arroyos, leaving the glaring silts to wide scattered tufts of creosote and rare mesquites, and on this waste, with its speck of slow-moving outfit, rises the sun of the 5th day from Santo Domingo, the 4th from the last water. The Gila Range unfolds into another labyrinth of granites, but it is not until high noon that we draw up the sheet-flooded incline, with wheels grinding anon on granites like those of the crest, and pull up the short arroyo to the classic spot of the old trail, Las Tinajas Altas, the High Tanks, longitude 114 degrees 5 minutes. Here, 30 miles from the nearest habitation, and looking down on 80 cross-marked graves, and how many unmarked no man can tell, we find the outfit of a hunting party, now absent on the chase, and after drinking deeply at the lowest basin, fare sumptuously on their spoil. The historic high tanks. Las Tinajas Altas are a series of water pockets, partly potholes, partly cataract pools, worn in the gulch bottom by torrents following the rare storms of the region. The lowest and largest is confined partly by great boulders and granitic debris, and is reached by stock. 100 feet of finger and toe climbing over smooth rock leads to 2 others, and in 50 feet more there is a third. Still higher, one of the party climbs to a 4th, and thence on to the 10th, stopping at a smooth slope apparently leading to the 11th basin, holding water the average year round. Old the Tem, and the quaint spelling of the Yuma supervisor on a guide board 7 miles away. The climb was made partly to examine the Indian mortars ground in the ledges and great boulders about every pool, mortars numbering hundreds if not thousands, some but a few decades old, but most so ancient that the polished bowls rise high above the unpolished rocks around them, mortars recording the visits of uncounted generations of devotees, to whom each laboriously wrought basin was at once symbol of an invocation for precious food and life-giving water. One boulder bore 40 pits in its upper face, another 28, and up to the highest tinaja reached they are found in corresponding profusion. Most of them must have antedated Padre Kino, who passed this way just 2 centuries ago and mapped Route and Tinaja in 1702, and most of the others must have witnessed the long procession of pioneers who trod the old Yuma Trail to make California and then watched the gradual settling of present desolation. Besides their historic interest, the high Tinajas present problems in geology and in meteorology, but it may be noted merely that they lie on the lee side of a rugged range, the first to catch the humid air drift from Gulf of California, and that their catchment gulf divides exceptionally long spurs of the narrow Sierra. 6 miles north of Tinajas Altas, the 5th campfire is lighted, and the team stock, revel, in cornmeal, while the saddle animals experiment suspiciously with hardtack and other man-feed, for the breakdowns of the supply outfit cost a day in dearly borne provender as well as in time. The next and last day is a hard one for the beasts, since the way skirts the lower slopes of a plain, alluvial in the valley bottom, but sheet flood carved above, over which the waters from a local storm in the mountains flowed yesterday. Flowed not in coalescing streams such as gather on humid soils in humid air, not in the continuous sheet flood formed when soil and air are of the dryness normal to the desert, but in a plexus of interlacing rivulets uniting and dividing every few yards or rods and digging little arroyos across the trail to the average number of 100 per mile. Into these the wagon plunges, and out of them it is pulled by the fagged mules hour after hour until the breaks of Gila River give respite. From daybreak onward, Castle Dome looms on the northern horizon 70 miles away and plays with passing cloudlets made and unmade in swift succession, but the turreted volcanic mass just beyond the Gila, christened Clotho's Temple by Mr. Gill, is more anxiously scanned as a landmark of growing promise. Even before midday, stock trails, the first seen since leaving the Sonoita Range, begin to appear. In mid-afternoon, a stray cowboy is spoken by Carol, but it is long after nightfall of the 6th day from Santo Domingo before the animals are comforted with hay and barley from the single store in Gila City. A lesson of the trail. No traveler over the old Yuma Trail can fail to feel the incongruity of its present condition with its past history. It is the way of the Western world to grow in population and wealth, to increase in industrial and intellectual tension. Yet most of this ancient way is peopled only by graves, enriched but by memories, nearly as lost to labor and to thought as the sand-tombed cities of Arabia and farther Turkestan. The roots of Cabeza de Vaca and De Soto and Coronado are gone, save to delving historians. The trans-Appalachian roads of our own grandsires are largely forgotten. Many of the trails of the Argonauts are effaced beyond retracing, but America probably presents no other lapse from populous activity to utter desert so complete as that of the zone trodden by Padre Kino and 5 generations of followers, and the lapse seems the greater because so uncharacteristic of Occidental progress. There was reason enough for the abandonment of the old route as a line of travel and traffic. The increasing safety of shipping first invaded its claims. The partition of Mexico next curtailed its functions, and the railways spanning the continent finally tapped its reservoirs at both termini. Yet the factors leading to the abandonment of the route only partially explain the desertion of its purlieus, and serve rather to fix attention on the fact that the entire zone traversed by the trail was gradually impoverished by the long-continued and short-sighted overtaxing of its meager resources. When the earliest Caucasian pioneers came, they found the province peopled sparsely with semi-migratory Papago Indians who wandered afar in search of water, located fields and villages even by the temporary wettings of chance storms, and erected shrines about the more permanent springs in Tinajas Altas, among others. They also found a fauna of deer and antelope and bighorn, with their carnivorous consociates, as well as birds, rodents, reptiles, and insects in wide variety and moderate abundance, and as the basis of the motile life, They found a varied flora delicately balanced between hard habitat and dependent fauna through eons of adjustment. True, the aggregate vitality was but a fraction of that characteristic of humid lands, yet the deficiency was partly made up by a longer individual life and a closer vital economy growing out of the exceptionally perfect solitary characteristic of the living things of arid regions, so that the sum of living resources was sufficient for reasonable demands. 2 or 3 generations of Caucasians drew on these resources in the easy way of restful latitudes without serious detriment. The missionaries and couriers followed tribesmen's trails to tribal domiciles and shared water and food with or without material exchange. Their animals found forage in grassy and shrubby spots, while they were able to take game or gather cactus fruits in season with little effort, and so long as they were few, the vital balance established through eons of earth-making was little disturbed. With the 3rd or 4th generation and the gradually increasing numbers of Caucasian travelers, the resources began to suffer. The forage grew scant. The wantonly harried cacti withdrew from the nearer borders. The big game became wary and betook to other ranges. With the decimation of plants and the trampling of stock, the soil grew less retentive of the scant moisture, in a ratio probably higher than that following deforestation of humid lands, so that the meager groundwater disappeared, the smaller springs went dry, and the chance tempest brought bane rather than the boon of the olden time. And with each decade of vital degradation, the Papago tribesmen withdrew to remoter haunts, or else degenerated into a parasitical dependence on the wells and wastage of the whites. Still, the natural balance was not utterly destroyed until the Anglo-Saxon came with that intense energy which balks at no obstacle, brooks no delay. He deepened old wells and dug new to catch the last drops of dwindling groundwater. He not only drove herds to devastate the enfeebled flora along the way, but stocked the adjacent ranges with cattle and sheep to supply the needs of multiplying travel, and he stopped only at the fortunate conjunction of railway making on more northerly lines, with the utter eradication of the grasses and other forage plants along the old route, and the consequent extinction of the useful fauna and destruction of the minor waters. The American desert stands apart from that of the Old World in superior vitality, with corresponding conditions of climate and soil, a peculiar flora of leafless, thorny, waxy-skinned, light-utilizing forms, and a distinctive fauna take the place of lifeless sand, and the characteristics of fauna and flora combine with several lines of geologic evidence to prove that the arid provinces grew slowly during several periods, running at least from the early Neocene to the present. It was during these periods that the unparalleled solidarity of our desert life was gradually developed. From age to age, the forms and forces of animal and vegetal life cooperated in common strife against sun and sand, and were forced by the hard environment into a harmonious interrelation in which none could dominate without risk of starvation, none yield unduly without certainty of extinction. Into this complex mechanism the prehistoric forebears of the Papago insinuated themselves so gently as scarce to disturb the relations of parts. Into the same mechanism the Papago themselves pushed their way harmlessly when driven into the outer deserts, but the natural interrelations were too delicate to withstand the violent entry of the Anglo-Saxon, and the weaker organisms withered before him. Other provinces have suffered from the brash vigor of Caucasian conquest. Forests have been sacrificed, and woodlands despoiled into sterile wastes. Fields have been ill-wrought into barrenness, and then turned out to wash into neighboring waterways, thereby ruining both hill and dale. Mines and quarries have been so unwisely worked as to check other industries for decades and entail public losses far exceeding personal gains. In legion ways, the adjustment of American settlers to new environments has been destructive, yet no new contacts have been more disastrous than those between the pioneers from humid fatherlands and the finely balanced vital solidarities of arid regions, and of all the examples of destructive contact between pioneers and precursors, none are more impressive than those so clearly attested by the old Yuma Trail. Happily, the dark lines of the picture carry a brighter complement. Science and American progress is but science practically applied, advances through experiences both of success and failure. No success could be more instructive than the failure attested by the abandonment of the country along the historic route, and this failure at once attests the folly of disregarding natural conditions when settlement is pushed into unfamiliar regions, and indicates the wisdom of weighing natural conditions as means of nature conquest. The natural potentiality of the country traversed by the old trail is proved by the condition of the neighboring plains on the southern side of the Sonoran boundary, which have never been overstocked, plains still mantled with herbage and grazed by herds of deer as in pre-Columbian times, and the slow resetting of shrubbery along the old way gives definite promise of restoration to the early state, while the moderate fruitfulness of the Sonoran plains points a way in which the growing resources may be utilized by patient adjustment of industries to natural conditions. So the wisdom, if not the imperative necessity, of adjusting means to conditions in the reclamation of arid lands is the leading lesson of the old Yuma Trail. End of section 1.
Section 2 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Piotr Natter. Advances in Geographic Knowledge During the 19th Century by Brigadier General A.W. Greely, Chief Signal Officer, U.S. Army. In these days, geographic exploration means not merely the topographic distribution of mountain or river, of lake or plain, but also the determination, in a cursory manner at least, of existent vegetable and animal life, of climatic conditions, and especially of the ethnology of inhabited areas. In forecasting the evolution of any aspect of the 20th century, the soundest base must be the advances of the 19th century along the lines of research. Judged by this standard, the present century will perfect the aspirations of the explorer of the last century to make known the entire surface of the earth. Few appreciate the enormous advances in geographic knowledge during the last 100 years, which may be summed up in the general statement that fully 60% of the world's land area was unexplored in 1800, while scarcely 10% now remains unknown. At the commencement of the last century, the four greatest geographic problems were the Northeast Passage, the Northwest Passage, the sources of the Nile, and the North Polar Quest. The last only remains. One Arctic problem solved. The Northwest Passage first yielded its secrets to the energetic explorers of this age, the result being attained by a series of voyages almost entirely under British auspices, that are unsurpassed in number, duration, and heroism. Attempts for a Northwest Passage, interrupted by the death of the great navigator James Cook, who lost his life therein, were renewed owing to the success of William Scoresby Jr. in exploring East Greenland, 1817 to 1822. Prosecuted both by land and sea, material advances came through Parry, Ross, and Franklin, 1819 to 1835, while the voyages of Austin, Belcher, Collinson, McClintock, McClure, Rae, and others in search of Franklin, 1845 to 1859, completely solved the mystery. Parry, in 3 notable voyages, explored the greater part of the islands and waterways north of America halfway from Baffin Bay to Bering Strait, passing north of the magnetic pole. John Ross explored the Felix Boothia Peninsula, the north point of the continent of America, while his lieutenant and nephew James C. Ross located the North Magnetic Pole at Cape Adelaide, 70 degrees 5 minutes north, 96 degrees 44 minutes west. The north coasts of America were outlined by the land journeys of Franklin, Beechey, Dease and Simpson, 1819 to 1846, from King William Land west to Point Barrow. Other notable advances have been made in Arctic America by Inglefield, Kane, Hall, Nares, and Greely in Grinnell Land and northwest Greenland, by Drygalski, Giesecke, Gard, Holm, Steenstrup, and other Danes in western Greenland, by Scoresby, Gra, Coldway, Payer, Nordenskjöld, Gard, Clevering, Holm, Ryder, and Peary on the east coast, while Nansen and Peary have crossed the inland ice, the latter to the extreme southeastern point of the new land to the north of Greenland, discovered by Greely in 1882. Advances toward the North Pole. Spitsbergen has been fully explored by Gaimard, Nordenskjöld, Torrell, Lee Smith, and Conway. Weyprecht and Payer discovered Franz Josef Land, whose limits have been extended and defined by Lee Smith, Jackson, Nansen, and Wellman. De Long drifted from Bering Strait to the New Siberian Islands, and Nansen's extraordinary continuation of De Long's drift around Spitsbergen has most materially advanced our knowledge of the Siberian and Polar Seas. Advances toward the North Pole have been made through the exertions of Scoresby, 81 degrees 30 minutes north, Parry, 82 degrees 45 minutes north, Nares, 83 degrees 20 minutes north, Greely, 83 degrees 24 minutes north, the most northerly land as yet, Nansen, 86 degrees 14 minutes north, and Abruzzi, 86 degrees 33 minutes north, within 207 geographic miles of the pole. As to the Northeast Passage, Nordenskjöld, having faith in both its scientific value and practicability, selected Palander as his navigator. Sailing from Tromsø in 1878, they passed Kara Sea successfully and readily rounded the North Cape of Asia. Beset by ice and obliged to winter within 120 miles of Bering Strait, Nordenskjöld completed the circumnavigation of Asia in 1879. Within the Antarctic Circle, to the south of Patagonia, Palmer, Bellinghausen, Biscoe, Larsen, and Gerlache discovered Palmer Land and adjacent islands. To the south of New Zealand, Belleny found islands, and James C. Ross added to his Antarctic laurels by discovering ice-clad Victoria Land, with its flaming volcanoes, and in locating the South Magnetic Pole. South of Kerguelen is the Enderby Land of Biscoe, while southeast of Tasmania an archipelago of desolate islands, located by Wilkes and d'Urville, marks the northern limit of the ice-clad Antarctica. Exploration of Australia. The greatest southern confederacy, Australia, has a European population exceeding 5 millions, but in 1800 its 2,000 settlers did not even have a country with a recognized name. As New Holland, it appeared on the best maps a featureless central area, with its outlined coast largely conjectural. Surveys of the coast, begun by Bass and Flinders, were finished by King in 1822. Wickham and Stokes in 1837 to 1843. Inland, Hughes solved the hydrographic problem of the Murray watershed. Airy traced the south coast along the Great Australian Bight. The Central Desert was made known by Mitchell and Sturt, while Gray and Gregory explored in the northwest and Leichhardt and Kennedy in the northeast. The most fruitful journey was that of Stewart, 1858 to 1862, from the inhabited south coast to the extreme north, which opened a fertile, well-watered district to colonization. The western desert has been explored here and there by Forrest, Warburton, and Giles, the last named having twice traversed the Great Sahara east and west. New Zealand first came to our knowledge by missionary labours, 1814 to 1830, and later by commercial extensions and gold hunting. New Guinea has been explored in the last half-century by Wallace, Mayo, Forbes, von Schleinitz, and Dallmann. Opening up South America. Of the Americas, the longest known is least explored. South America, however, was fortunate in the beginning of the century, 1799 to 1804, with such investigators as Humboldt and Bonpland, who traversed Venezuela, determined the remarkable bifurcation of the Orinoco, visited Magdalena, Quito, and the volcanoes. This journey was not only locally important, for it gave an extraordinary impulse to the comprehensive study of the earth. Von Eschwege, von Wied, Saint-Hilaire, Spix, and Martius explored the interior of Brazil from the Amazon basin. d'Orbigny and Castelnau devoted themselves to the geography of the central regions between the Rio de la Plata and the Amazon. Darwin, Wilkes, and Gillis explored the coastlines of the continent. Wallace and Bates did wonderful scientific work in the Amazon basin, followed by Agassiz and a host of other explorers. Of the tributary basins of the Amazon, Steinen has mapped the Xingu, Church de Madeira, Chandless and Labour de Perus. In the Guianas, Schomburg's researches are the most valuable. In the late years, the most important explorations are doubtless those of the French International Polar Expedition at Cape Horn under Martial. Pathmakers in North America. Of the continents, none other has so benefited by the explorations of the last century as North America. To the genius, tact, and energy of Humboldt was early, in 1804, due modern geographical knowledge of Spanish America, which was materially increased by the explorations of Pike from St. Louis to Chihuahua, via the Kansas, Arkansas, and the Rio Grande. Kotzebue and Zagostin in the first half, and Dall, Kennicott, and Allen in the last half of the century have outlined the general features of Alaska. In the Stikine, Klondike, Tanana, Nome, and Kuyukuk regions, the gold hunters have explored thoroughly. In Canada, the early discoveries of Franklin, Richardson, Ray, and Back have been supplemented by Petiot. In the Mackenzie Basin, Dawson and Ogilvie in the Yukon watershed, Bell and Tyrrell around Hudson Bay, Boas in Baffinland, and Lowe in Labrador. As regards the United States, the country west of the Mississippi was almost entirely unknown in 1800. The early trans-Mississippi explorations form one phase of the history of the United States Army. The most fruitful in results of such journeys is that of Lewis and Clark, 1804 to 1806. They ascended the Missouri from mouth to source, crossed the Continental Divide, traced thence the Snake and Columbia to the ocean, and returned via the Yellowstone. For the first time the United States was crossed from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This demonstration of the practicability of the overland travel was an essential factor in the occupancy of Oregon, which gave the first foothold for the American on the Pacific coast. Mapping the Great West. Pike explored the valleys of the upper Mississippi, Arkansas, and Rio Grande, crossed part of Chihuahua and Texas, then unknown countries. Bonneville, 1832 to 1836, explored the valleys of the Platte, the Green, and Yellowstone, and, pioneer of the Oregon Trail, twice crossed to the Columbia, passing west via the Snake River, the Grand Ronde, and Blue Mountains. He also made known the great basins of Salt Lake and Humboldt River, and the pass across the Nevadas to the Sacramento. Bonneville first correctly charted the hydrography of the Trans-Rocky Mountains regions, and eliminated the Rio Buenaventura and other mythical streams. Fremont's journeys were important as initiating an extensive series of scientific explorations. Kearny surveyed the boundaries of Texas and Louisiana, Boone the country between the Arkansas and Canadian, and Emory from Leavenworth to San Diego via the Arkansas, Del Norte, and Gila. Among the many expeditions may be mentioned that of Simpson to the Navajo country, Stansbury to Salt Lake, Sitgreaves to the Zuni and Colorado rivers, and Mullen from Walla Walla to Fort Benton. Important surveys are those of the Pacific Railway route by McClellan, Whipple, Park, Williamson, and Derby, the Mexican boundary by Emory, the northwestern boundary, 1857 to 1861, and in later years those of King, Hayden, Powell, and Wheeler, which have elucidated most of the geographical problems in the United States. Rivalry in Asia began early. In the geographical, as in the political evolution of Asia, the potent forces have been Great Britain and Russia, so that northern and southern Asia have been almost separate fields of enterprise for the dominant nation, with Central Asia as debatable ground for rivalry by both nations. In northern Asia, explorations in the early century were confined largely to the local extensions of knowledge, except additions to the New Siberian islands by Samkiv, Sirovatskov, Hedenström, and Sannikov (1805 to 1811), of the Siberian Ocean by Wrangel and Anjou (1820 to 1823), and in Nova Zembla by Lutke (1821 to 1824), Pachusov (1832 to 1835), and Ber and Zivolka (1837 to 1838). The foundation of the Imperial Russian Geographical Society in 1845 gave impetus and direction to Asiatic discoveries, increased knowledge of the Russian Empire being the aim. From 1849 to 1857 Hoffmann, Aksakov and others explored the Ural region and the ethnographical features of Russia proper and of western Siberia, extending in scope from 1857 to 1871. Besides Siberian researches in Amur, Ussuri and Sakhalin, the Caucasian and Aral-Caspian regions were explored in the northwest, while to the east many expeditions entered Turkestan, Manchuria, Khorasan and Mongolia. Between 1871 and 1885, Central Asia, Mongolia and western China were explored, largely through Przewalski, and international polar stations were established on the Lena and in Nova Zembla. Severtsov and Fedchenko explored Turkestan minutely. The deserts of northwestern Siberia and Lake Baikal were examined and a sea route opened from Tobolsk by way of the Kara Sea to St. Petersburg. Tibet is a mystery yet. During the last 15 years, attention has been paid to Caucasia, Turkestan, the Amur and the Black Sea regions. In these years perhaps the most interesting explorations are those of Hedin, who crossed the desert of moving sand hills between the Yarkand and Khotan rivers, outlined the northern rim of the Great Tibetan Plateau, and examined Lob Nor Basin. Explorations in southern Asia originated in the desire to extend inland the sphere of British influence. Political considerations speedily entered into the problem, and those barriers proved more difficult to surmount than physical obstacles. In reaching the Himalayan foothills, and later in passing across the ranges into Afghanistan and Tibet, the explorers necessarily awaited brief intervals in the wars of conquest and occupation. Manning succeeded in entering Tibet in 1811, but was soon expelled. Non-intercourse was so rigidly enforced that the British service had recourse to selected native agents, and most of the early advances were made through secret journeys of pandits, among whom Chandra Das stands foremost. As usual, much has been learned by missionary labours, especially in Tibet, through Hooke and de Godin, the latter also contributing much to a knowledge of Indochina. In recent years both countries have been explored by Rockhill, Bouvalot, Littledale, Sheheni, Henri of Orléans, and others, especially the Pandit Nain Singh, under conditions that leave much to be added. Japan has opened her unknown empire to the world. While much has been done by Japanese travellers to make its geography known, yet the geological researches of Naumann should be noted. Map of Africa filled in. The extent to which exploration changed the map of Africa during the 19th century is known only to professional geographers. It is true that in 1800 the entire coast of Africa was known with some definiteness through the exertions of Portuguese navigators in previous centuries. Yet apart from the valley of the Nile, geographic knowledge of the interior was confined to a scant 100 miles southward from the Mediterranean and northward from the Cape of Good Hope, and to the estuaries of the Zambezi, Congo and Niger. Geographic knowledge stopped almost within sight of the sea or the lower Nile. Scarcely 50 years since there appeared, from 5 degrees north to 10 degrees north, on the best maps of Africa, the legend Kong Range, mountains supposed to extend across the continent. Today it is known that this central area forms part of the Great Congo Basin, with a population of more than 40 millions. In outlining the march of exploration toward the interior of the Dark Continent, only the most succinct account is possible. For clearness of statement, explorations are treated under 5 general heads. First, Trans-Saharan, from the Mediterranean. Second, the Niger regions. Third, the lake regions near the upper White Nile. Fourth, the Zambesian region. And fifth, the Congo Basin. According to different definitions of a desert, the Sahara varies in area from 5,500,000 to 3,500,000 square miles, of which the eastern third is generally known as the Libyan Desert. Hitherto this desert area, with scant water, intense heat, and whirling dust storms, interposed an inaccessible barrier between the Hamitic nations of the Mediterranean coast and the Negro tribes of the Sudan. Sahara's barriers overcome. Explorations of the Sahara were fruitless until Oudney, Denham, and Clapperton crossed, 1822 to 1824, from Tripoli to Lake Chad in the Sudan. Laing, following, crossed from Tripoli via Gadmes and Tuat to Timbuktu, the mysterious city of strangely exaggerated importance from previous centuries. Panet, Vincent, Duveyer, and Lenz explored the desert between Senegal and southeastern Algeria. It was Barth who gave the first definite account of the Saharan region after a journey of great extent and importance. Starting from Tripoli, he crossed the Sahara to Lake Chad, passed northern Hausaland to the Niger at Say, and thence reached Timbuktu. Returning northeast through Sokoto to Kukawa, he explored Bornu. Barth's journeys were of great value, for he not only made known to the world the existence and accessibility of hundreds of thousands of square miles of fertile territory, but he also gave, in 5 volumes, an enormous amount of geographical information, in which he treated quite thoroughly the ethnology of the various tribes of the central Sudan. His successor, Rolfs, after exploring southern Morocco, penetrated the Sahara to the oases of Tuat and Gadames, and those of the districts of Fezzan and Tibesti. He then crossed from the Mediterranean to the Guinea coast via Bornu and Lagos on the Niger, the first European to make the journey. Later, 1873 to 1878, he explored the oasis in the Libyan desert. The Sahara, instead of being a low desert of marine origin, is an elevated plateau, which has been enormously denudated by the disintegration of its rocks through temperature changes and the distribution of its dust by high winds. It is not entirely rainless, has many fertile oases, and only needs abundant water to produce luxuriant vegetation. The first Europeans to cross Africa from east to west, north of the equator, were Mateucci and Massari, who travelled from Suakin via Kordofan, Wadai, and Kano to the Niger. Nachtigal, 1869 to 1870, made a journey from Tripoli via Fezzan to the Libyan desert, where he explored the remarkable mountainous regions of Tibesti. Examining the Lake Chad district, he reached Egypt via Wadai and Darfur. Niger and Nile, an open book. The mystery of the Niger, long erroneously supposed to flow through the Sudan to the west, was partly solved by Mungo Park, who, starting from Gambia, in his first journey reached Segu on the Niger. His second expedition, 1805, ended in failure. Clapperton, renewing the survey, perished, but his faithful assistant, Richard Lander, definitely solved, in 1830, the mystery of the Niger by descending from Bussa to the mouth of the stream. French energy has explored Senegal and Gambia by the journeys of Roubaud, Mollien, de Beaufort, and especially Caillet. The great mystery of the Nile sources, after 20 centuries of speculation, has been solved by the labours of various explorers, most largely by Baker, Speke, and Stanley. Its largest lake source, Victoria Nyanza, was discovered by Speke, who missed Albert Nyanza. Baker discovered the source of the blue, Abyssinian, Nile, and the Albert Nyanza of the main or White Nile. To Stanley belongs the honour of the discovery of the remotest source, Albert Edward Nyanza, which feeds the Albert Nyanza through the Semliki River. The fabled mountains of the moon have given place, in eastern Africa, to the most remarkable lacustrine system. The vast equatorial lakes cover extensive regions, feed some of the largest rivers of the world, and by their transportation facilities favour commerce. Their central situation between the Cape and Cairo, convenient to the Indian Ocean and on the confines of the Congo Basin, caused them to be recognized as the central key to African domination by Germany and Great Britain, who now control the region. The largest lake, Tanganyika, was discovered by Barton, while Livingstone contributed Nyassa, Moero, Bangueolo, and others. Joseph Thomson, exploring south from Tanganyika, discovered Lake Rukwa and also traversed unknown Mass Island. Livingstone's great work. The discovery of the equatorial lakes was of subordinate import to that of the Congo basin, which grew out of missionary labours in South Africa. To the genius and energy of two men, David Livingstone and Henry M. Stanley, are primarily due the exploration and utilization of the vast unexplored regions between the Sudan and the Orange River. Unquestionably, the missionary Livingstone, who settled in Bechuanaland in 1841, was one of the greatest of African explorers. First discovering Lake Ngami, he turned his attention to the Zambezi Valley and practically covered this basin in 1851 to 1856, and later, in 1858 to 1864, explored Lake Nyassa and the adjacent country. Most important results flowed directly and indirectly from the last journeys of his life, in 1866 to 1873, when, crossing the watershed to the very source of the Congo, he discovered Lakes Moero and Bangueolo, the Luapula and the Lualaba rivers, now recognized branches of the Congo. Stanley, who found the long-lost Livingstone, completed the exploration of the main Congo basin in a journey, 1875 to 1878, which, in its discoveries and results, is unequalled in African exploration. His circumnavigation of the Great Lakes, Victoria Nyanza and Tanganyika, was important, but the crossing to the watershed of the Lualaba, which he proved to be the Congo by following it to the Atlantic Ocean, was a journey of unsurpassed courage, persistency, and resourcefulness. His return to found the Congo state was followed by extensive discoveries, such as Lakes Leopold and Matumba, the Ubangi, Kasai, and other affluents of the mighty river. Stanley's geographic laurels were increased by his search for Emin Pasha, when he crossed Africa from the junction of the Congo and the Aruwini over the Bantu borderland. He discovered not only an extensive and almost impassable forest, but also the ultimate lake source of the White Nile, Albert Edward Nyanza. Stanley's exploration of the Congo basin was a potential force second only to that of Columbus's discovery of America. Each explorer opened up a new continent and gave rise to scientific and philanthropic schemes which affected the progress of the world. Europe awakened to the importance of the Congo basin, with its great lakes, its 10,000 miles of navigable rivers, which leave no part of the basin 100 miles distant, its fertile valleys, its animal life and vegetable resources, and its millions of inhabitants. Africa speedily became the centre of commercial exploitation, which was not confined to private enterprise. Most fortunately, by act of international conference, the Congo Free State, with an area of nearly 1,000,000 square miles, became independent. Presenting the greatest natural possibilities, it practically bears, in interest and importance, the same relation to Africa as does the watershed of the Mississippi and its tributaries to the United States. By rail and steamboat one now travels from the west coast through the Congo state more than halfway across Africa. Its revenue is counted by tens of millions of francs, its exports and imports increase steadily, and, apart from the 12 million inhabitants of the French Congo, it has a population of 30 million. The effect of the geographic evolution of Africa upon Europe may be estimated by the statement that Belgium, in its relations with the Congo state, deals with a country whose area is 100 times its own, and that of the 11,500,000 square miles of Africa, all but 500,000 are European dependencies. Oceanography, a new art. As to oceanography, a development of the 19th century, space only permits allusion to the work of Sigsbee in the Gulf of Mexico, Carpenter, Thomson, and Norwegian savants in the North Atlantic, and Nares and Murray in the Challenger expedition. The later work, under Murray's expedition, has outlined the main features of the oceanic world for the 20th century to explore and chart in detail. As to the 20th century, it should be noted that pioneer discoveries are yielding steadily to scientific exploration. Future work will trend toward the outlining of existent and possible relations between man and his geographic environment. In this sense, there remain numerous geographic problems whose satisfactory solution will tax many generations of scientific explorers. Such, for instance, are current investigations as to the acclimatization of Europeans in tropical Africa and the distribution of underground streams in the arid regions of Australia and the United States. Reverting to pioneer discoveries, the 20th century, despite unceasing efforts of this age, inherits an extensive legacy of unknown lands. Exploration for exploration's sake will for many years find ample scope in untraversed polar regions, Arctic and Antarctic, where the attainment of the poles will continue to be largely the end in view. Of unexplored areas, West Australia now presents the most extensive, its vast desert having been examined only here and there along routes hundreds of miles apart. While North America has large, vaguely known districts only in Mexico and Central America, yet South America presents many fields of great promise to adventurous men. This is especially true of the eastern slopes of the Andes in Ecuador, Colombia, and Brazil. In the western half of the drainage basin of the Amazon, exploration has touched only the banks of navigable streams. Our knowledge is largely conjectural as to the extent and distribution of its forests and upland, and of the existent conditions of its fauna, flora, and inhabitants. Virgin fields remaining. Even in Africa, which for a quarter of a century has engrossed the zeal and energy of explorers, there is much yet to be made known and charted. Not only is there great work to be done in the Libyan Desert and the Central Sahara, but even the country of the Tauriks in Western Sahara needs thorough exploration. South of Abyssinia and northwest of Lake Rudolph is almost virgin ground. The most interesting areas are the primeval forests in the basins of the Ubangi and Aruwimi. These regions invite naturalists and ethnologists to reveal to the world their fauna, flora, and ethnology, and especially to correlate information on the pygmies of Du Chaillu, Stanley, and Schweinfurt. The new year presents such political complications as ensure tremendous changes in Eastern Asia during the 20th century. As rehabilitated China concedes extended spheres of foreign influence, geographical knowledge will grow apace. Gradually, the great blanks in Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, and Indochina will be filled on maps of Asia. Like advances may be expected as to Arabia, Sumatra, Borneo, and Malay Peninsula, and especially the Philippine archipelago. In the last named regions, the almost untraversed islands of Mindanao, Mindoro, and Palawan will soon yield to the energetic and intelligent explorer the long-hidden secrets of nature as to their fauna, flora, and capabilities of service to mankind in general and to the United States in particular. End of section 2.
Section 3 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rita Boutros. The National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901, by the National Geographic Society. Mexico of Today, by Señor Dr. Don Juan N. Navarro, Consul General of Mexico in New York City. My object in preparing this paper is to present to the members of the National Geographic Society and to the readers of its journal some well-ascertained facts about the Mexico of today, and the many natural and commercial attractions which make it one of the best places in which to invest capital with security and the promise of a speedy and splendid return. Before entering upon my subject, I wish to state that my words and opinions are made on my own responsibility and are in no sense semi-official. In speaking of my own country, I can hardly be required to be impartial in my opinions, but in the statement of facts I shall endeavor to give not only my own private judgment, but the opinions of persons and newspapers who have nothing to expect or fear from Mexico. Some years ago I knew by sight a tourist who went to Mexico City and stayed there exactly a week, not knowing, of course, a single word of Spanish, and on his return home published an article on Mexico, relating all his romantic adventures in the country, among which was an attack by a band of robbers on a stage-coach where that remarkable man was traveling. The captain of this band was none other than a black-eyed señorita who practiced the dangerous and romantic vocation of highway robbery. All those adventures were very entertaining, and their only fault was not to have any existence except in the fertile imagination of their inventor. Within the past 30 years the means of transportation have wonderfully increased. Instead of sailing vessels and a steamer every 3 weeks, there are now 2 regular steamers every week and many tramp steamers. And by land we have 4 railroad lines connecting the 2 countries. The configuration of the land of Mexico is very peculiar. Low near the coasts, it ascends continually and very rapidly to the interior, until an altitude from 6,000 to 10,000 feet is reached above the sea level, arriving at what is called the tableland. Our capital, Mexico City, has an elevation of nearly 7,400 feet. That is to say, it is from 800 to 900 feet higher than the highest peak of Mount Washington, which has an elevation of 6,500 feet. Although the city is only a little more than 19 degrees north of the equator, it never experiences a tropical summer. That a light overcoat is needed in the evening at every season of the year is seldom appreciated by foreign travelers, who, under the notion of visiting a tropical country, come provided only with summer clothing, and thus often contract diseases consequent upon exposure to the cold air. Not a single navigable river traverses the whole country. This unfavorable natural condition has necessitated the building of many railroads at an enormous cost over the mountainous soil. Our Constitution is similar to that of the United States in the main points. Mexico is a federal republic, divided into states and territories, the former ruled by their particular constitutions, and the latter directly governed by the federal authorities. The executive is appointed by popular election every 4 years. But as the Constitution prescribes no limits for re-election, we all have had the pleasure, and in our opinion the good sense, of re-electing General Diaz for the 5th term, ending on November 30th, 1904. Perhaps some persons will not deem it in accordance with Republican ideas to re-elect a man so many times, but we Mexican citizens answer that if it is not in accordance with certain theoretical principles, it is in perfect conformity with that sense called common, precisely because it is so rare. The president of a republic is the attorney, elected by the citizens to administer for a certain period, under prescribed rules established by the Constitution, their foreign and interior affairs. If we find a person who performs the duties imposed upon him with remarkable ability and honesty, as we Mexican citizens believe that a man of that kind cannot be very easily found, we renew our power of attorney for another 4 years, leaving intact the most severe maxims of republicanism. This custom of changing as little as possible those public officers who, for the performance of their duties, require a certain amount of technical instruction and experience, is very old in Mexico. Even in the times when political parties waged terrible war upon each other, causing frequent changes of administration, many officers who, for their competency and honesty, seemed to all to be the right men in the right places, were left undisturbed. If we entertain an elevated opinion of General Diaz, we only agree with what the press of every country, from Russia to Spain, and from Cape Horn to Washington, declare when they assert that Mexico is one of the most prosperous and best governed countries in the world. Our constitutional laws differ from those of the United States in denying the right to religious corporations of any denomination to possess or administer or to hold any mortgage upon real estate. In consequence, the property of such corporation must be in cash or in shares of railroad, telegraph, manufacturing, mining, or some other kind of enterprise which keeps their money in constant circulation. The object of this legislation was to prevent the stagnation of real estate constantly produced by those corporations having two characteristics: indefinite duration and possession in common, not any of their members being able to dispose of any part of the property, as is the case in mercantile associations. Another point worthy of mention is the disposition of our fundamental laws relative to marriage. Our legislators consider marriage as the cornerstone of the social edifice, and consequently they did not leave it to the legislatures of the states, but prescribed precise and ineludible rules as to its nature and form of contract. In short, they considered marriage a civil contract constituted by the indissoluble union of a single man to a single woman, and requiring for its legal validity that it be contracted before a civil magistrate appointed for the purpose. Of course, the laws do not prevent the contracting parties from having recourse to the ministers of their religious creed. And this is the reason why in Mexico all nuptial ceremonies are double, one of a religious and the other of a civil character. Some lawyers say that it is not convenient to hinder or make marriage a little difficult, but others answer in reply that it is better to oblige men and women to practice the known proverb, "Look before you leap," or as we say in Spanish, "Antes que te cases, mira lo que haces." Before you get married, think of what you are doing. Divorce is absolutely rejected, though legal separation is allowed with the formalities prescribed by said laws. The public administration of Mexico is divided into 7 departments: Foreign Affairs, the Interior, Justice and Public Education, Improvements, Industry, Commerce and Colonization, Communications and Public Works, Finance and Public Credit, and War and Navy. The Department of Foreign Affairs maintains amicable relations with all the countries of both hemispheres. Today, Mexico has not a single cause of disagreement with any power or people in the world. One of the principal objects of the Department of the Interior is to cultivate cordial relations between the federal and state authorities. There was a time when almost every state governor conscientiously believed it to be his duty to oppose in every way the federal executive, and even some of them maintained a large military force, not to keep peace and give public security, but in order to resist by force, if necessary, the orders of the federal executive. Those narrow-minded and anarchical ideas are things of the past, and General Diaz, in his last report, relates with patriotic pleasure that not a single state has any difficulty or displeasure with the federal authorities or with any of its neighboring states, and that all their governors try to act in perfect accord with the federal executive to give an impulse to the continual progress of the whole country. In other words, they are sufficiently enlightened to avail themselves of the reasonable liberty given by the Constitution to administer their internal affairs, and remember that they are only members of that great body called the Mexican Republic, the only sovereign in the true and correct sense of the word. The Board of Health is a branch of this department, and the federal executive and all the states devote to it special attention. In the city of Mexico, a general hospital will be completed very soon, where 22 isolated pavilions have already been finished, and where more than 600 patients can be commodiously, hygienically, and scientifically cared for. The states have followed this example, and many of them have finished or have in actual construction similar institutions based upon the same scientific principles. The efficacy of the measures taken by the Board of Health in regard to vaccination and the prevention of smallpox has received the amplest confirmation from experience. In 1898, an epidemic of smallpox broke out in different parts of the country and in the city of Mexico. The total number of deaths was only 78, the great majority being foreigners who had not taken the precaution of being re-vaccinated. We have another institution in excellent condition in the federal district. That is the police. The whole force is divided into two large sections, the city or urban and the country or rural police. The greater part of the first consists of footmen with a small squadron of mounted police, while the second or rural police is exclusively composed of mounted men. The distribution of the city police is, in the opinion of many natives and foreigners, perfectly organized for public protection. There is always a policeman stationed at the crossing of every street and avenue, and misdemeanors and crimes can often be prevented and the criminals almost always caught. In general, the policemen are courteous and ready, not only to help when called, but to give any information about streets and public buildings, in a word, to be useful to everybody. The services rendered are entirely gratuitous, and many persons, especially foreigners, who with the best intention have tried to give them a voluntary reward for the recovery of lost goods, can testify that the reward has never been accepted in any form. General Diaz, in his last report, makes the important observation that well-made statistical tables prove that it is not criminality that has increased, but rather the efficiency of the police. The rural police, who guard the roads of the country in general, are formed exclusively by mounted men, picked from the best riders of the Republic, and are mounted on splendid horses. This force, by reason of their efficiency and beautiful appearance, always attract the attention of the spectators. Places for the correction and punishment of criminals, or penitentiaries, are being built throughout the Republic according to the systems proven best by experience, and are all founded upon the philosophical and truly Christian idea that society, when it takes hold of a criminal, does not intend to wreak vengeance on him, but to prevent him from repeating his offensive acts, and to reform and convert him by every possible means into a good and honest citizen, and at the same time to deter others from following his example. Let us now glance briefly over two of the most important foundations of any society, and more especially of a republic, the Department of Justice and Public Education. The federal and state authorities are continually trying to perfect the administration of justice and to elect able and honest citizens to the judgeships. Our Constitution, like yours, decrees that the judicial authorities must be elected by popular vote, and these elections are held in the most tranquil way. My own personal opinion is against this manner of appointing judges and magistrates, as I do not think popularity is always the best qualification for the sacred duties of a judge. The importance of public education is fully appreciated by the federal and state authorities, and there is a complete system derived from the study by competent persons of the methods followed in foreign countries. The federal government has not only adopted the systems considered the best, but has appointed boards of education to give to public education an impetus in the right direction, and to make it uniform in the Republic. In 1898, the number of schools in the Republic was 12,358, and of this number, 6,738 were supported by federal and state authorities, 2,953 by municipalities, and 2,667 by private parties. The average monthly attendance of pupils was 556,009. The expense of the established schools supported by the authorities amounted to $5,980,180.72, not including the schools kept by private parties, of which I have no information. If we take as a point of comparison the cost of the schools paid by the authorities, we can calculate very approximately that $7 million were expended for public education in Mexico in that year. The number of schools for girls was 3,296, for boys 6,813, and mixed 2,249. This total has certainly increased since then. The attendance of pupils increases very rapidly year after year, and I was agreeably surprised when visiting my country after an absence of many years to observe the wonderful results attained by our educational system. There is yet much to be done, but what has been already accomplished is truly surprising, and the Board of Education is continually improving and multiplying the means of instruction. To make good teachers and to impress unity of method, there are normal schools for men and women. In the normal school for women in the city of Mexico, there are actually more than 1,600 girls who want to adopt the noble profession of teachers. Another excellent normal school exists in the state of Veracruz, and there are others in other states, but I have no data at hand concerning them. For professional instruction, there are, principally in the federal districts, schools of jurisprudence, engineering in all its branches, commerce, agriculture, arts and trades, fine arts, one conservatory of music, and for all avocations required by the actual state of sciences and arts, and the government is continually giving to each one of them all means conducive to perfect instruction, beginning with a comfortable and hygienic building. The one, for instance, in use by the School of Arts and Trades for Women has been extended because the actual attendance is more than 1,000. The number of public libraries in 1898 was 130. The National Library of the capital last year added to its catalog nearly 10,000 volumes by purchase and 9,500 volumes by the donation of Mrs. Isabel Pesado de Meyer, widow of our late and lamented minister to the French Republic, Mr. Antonio de Meyer y Celis, my dear friend, and one of the best and most patriotic citizens Mexico has ever produced. The number of museums in the Republic is about 30. The National Museum of the capital, the richest of all, received last year valuable additions in the acquisition of a collection of archaeological pieces from the state of Michoacán, a collection of antique objects from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and facsimiles of the codices existing in the European libraries relative to our history, donated by the Bishop of Tehuantepec and the Duc de Luba. The newspapers published during that year numbered 533, and of that total 153 were published in the city of Mexico, among them being daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly journals. Very few, fortunately, were exclusively given to politics, the rest to the exposition and discussion of science, industry, commerce, agriculture, jurisprudence, medicine, political economy, mining and civil engineering, military art, etc. These few facts, rapidly enumerated, will give some idea of the real state of the public education in Mexico. Passing to our Department of Improvements, Commerce and Industry, etc., our mining industry is the most important in every respect, and deserves to be mentioned first. The number of mineral properties at the end of last year was 12,304, covering an area of 128,380 hectares, the equivalent of nearly 320,000 acres, besides 6 extensive zones in the states of Sonora, Chihuahua, and Michoacán, and in the territory of Lower California, which were rented to parties under contracts made by the executive and approved by the Federal Congress for the working of all mines that may be discovered in these tracts of land. The yield of our silver mines in the 4 years from 1892 to 1896 was $225,247,459, or a yearly average of $56,311,864. During the 4 years 1896 to 1900, the production was $274,370,157, a yearly average of $68,592,540. Our production of gold is also increasing. From 1892 to 1896, it was $14,123,876. And from 1896 to 1900, $31,108,425. That is, the output more than doubled during the last 4 years. In the production of silver from 1899 to 1900, there was a decline of more than $2 millions, but General Diaz explains the cause very satisfactorily by recalling the instability of production, which is subject to many accidents and unforeseen circumstances that diminish or stop suddenly the output of a silver mine. Our mining enterprises are not now confined to silver and gold, but in the mining of many other metals, such as copper, antimony, lead, and mercury. Large capital is employed. Our exports of copper in the last financial year amounted to nearly $10 millions. Some of our mineral melting establishments have disposed of the following quantities: Compañía Metallúrgica Mexicana de San Luis Potosí, from December 1896 to September 30th, 1900, 332,358 tons. Gran Fundición Central de Aguas Calientes, from December 1896 to October 1900, 625,855 tons. Compañía del Boleo, Baja California, in the years from 1896 to the end of 1899, 40,422 tons. A department of vital importance to us is that of colonization. Formerly the government made some efforts in this direction, and we now have 29 colonies in steady progress, 13 established directly by the government, and 16 by private companies. Experience has taught us, however, that it is better to leave this matter to private enterprises, and the only positive aid given by the government is the tranquillity, security, and incessant and rapid progress of the whole republic. When these advantageous conditions become universally known, the current of immigration will flow into Mexico, where nobody can starve, where the poorest, with some exertion, can arrive at a comfortable situation. The middle class become rich, and the rich can increase their capital by millions. And all this with a beautiful climate, salubrious everywhere, except on the coast, and among a peaceful, industrious people, who have well earned the reputation of being one of the most courteous and hospitable upon the face of the earth. To be continued in the May number. End of section 3.
Section 4 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Geographic Notes. Official information relating to the Philippines. The State Department has recently published 3 handsome volumes on the Philippine Islands. The first 2 volumes are a history of Spanish work in the archipelago, with a cyclopedic statement of the resources of the islands. The different peoples, their means of livelihood, their customs, and character are sympathetically portrayed by the editors, Reverend Jose Alguay and the Jesuit Fathers of Manila. The third volume is an atlas of about 60 colored maps. This atlas is the most comprehensive statement of what is known of the geography of the islands ever published. The collection of the material has been the work of generations of the Jesuits, but under the Spanish regime, want of money had prevented the publication of the mass of facts obtained. The mapmakers of the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey have systematized the material which the Jesuits supplied. Volumes 1 and 2 are in Spanish and illustrated with very good pictures. The set of 3 volumes may be obtained from the State Department by the payment of $20. The reports of the Taft Philippine Commission, which formed a volume of 600 pages, may now be obtained from the State Department gratis. The War Department has recently issued a large map of Luzon on the scale of 10 miles to the inch. It embodies all the latest information received by the departments from its officers and agents in the islands. The department has also printed a third and revised edition of the large map of the archipelago, based on the map of Montero y Gay, first published in Madrid. The latest edition of the progress map of Signal Corps telegraph lines and cables in the Philippines shows all lines laid by the Corps up to February 1, 1901. The lower half of Luzon is now covered with a network of wire, while 2 trunk lines penetrate to the extreme north end of the island. The islands of Panay, Cebu, Negros, Leyte, and Bohol each have several hundreds of miles of wire constructed by the Corps, and are connected by military cables. There are now in operation in the islands 9,000 miles of wire and 400 miles of cable. These maps may be obtained by responsible persons gratis. The Census of India. The census of India, taken March 1, 1901, gives the population of that vast country as 294,266,000, an actual increase of only 1.49% during 10 years, while during the preceding decade the increase was 11.2%. The population in 1891 was 287,717,000. But as certain tracts are included in the census of 1901 that were not enumerated in 1891, the net increase is only 4,283,669. In numbers, India has thus added to her population less than one-third of what the United States have gained, though the former has 4 times the population of the latter, an increase of 4 millions as against 13 millions for the United States. The reasons of this small increase in the figures are two. First, the terrible ravages of the plague for 4 consecutive years in the Bombay Presidency, and the 2 great famines of 1896-97 and 1899-1900. And second, the greater accuracy with which the work of the census has been performed. The population of British India has increased considerably, while in the native states it has fallen off. British India now numbers 231,085,000 against 221,266,000 in 1891, and the native states 63,181,000 against 66,050,000 in 1891. It is yet too early to analyze the returns for the native states, but there would appear to be an excessive decline in the birth rate. The following table gives the population in thousands, the third column showing the percentage of increase or decrease. Headings are British Territory, 1901, 1891, and percentage. Ajmer and Marwar combined, 1901, 476, 1891, 542, percentage negative 12.17. Assam, 1901, 6,122, 1891, 5,433, plus 12.67. Bengal, 1901, 74,713, 1891, 71,346, percentage plus 4.72. Berar, 1901, 1,491, 1891, 2,897, minus 4.99. Bombay, 1901, 15,330, 1891, 15,957, percentage minus 3.93. Sindh, 1901, 3,212, 1891, 2,871, percentage plus 11.88. Aden, 1901, 41, 1891, 44, percentage minus 6.48. Upper Burma, 1901, 3,749, 1891, 3,362, percentage plus 14.49. Lower Burma, 1901, 5,371, 1891, 4,408, percentage plus 21.84. Central Provinces, 1901, 9,845, 1891, 10,784, percentage minus 8.71. Coorg, 1901, 170, 1891, 173, plus 4.28. Madras, 1901, 38,208, 1891, 35,630, plus 7.24. Northwest Provinces, 1901, 34,812, 1891, 34,253, percentage plus 1.63. Oud, 1901, 12,884, 1891, 12,650, percentage plus 2.40. Punjab, 1901, 22,449, 1891, 20,766, percentage plus 7.58. Baluchistan, 1901, 810, 1891, asterisk, no comparison possible, percentage, asterisk, no comparison possible. Ottomans, 1901, 24. 1891, 15. Percentage, plus 56.95. Total, 1901, 231,085. 1891, 221,266. Percentage, plus 4.44. Native states. Hyderabad, 1901, 11,174. 1891, 11,537. Percentage, minus 3.14. Baroda, 1901, 1,956. 1891, 2,415. Percentage, minus 19.23. Mysore, 1901, 5,538. 1891, 4,943. Percentage, plus 12. Kashmir, 1901, 2,906. 1891, 2,543. Plus 14.24. Rajputana, 1901, 9,841. 1891, 12,016. Percentage, minus 18.1. Central India, 1901, 8,501. 1891, 10,318. Percentage, minus 17.5. Bombay, 1901, 6,891. 1891, 8,059. Percentage, minus 14.49. Madras, 1901, 4,190. 1891, 3,700. Percentage, plus 13.23. Central Provinces, 1901, 1,983. 1891, 2,160. Percentage, minus 8.19. Bengal, 1901, 3,735. 1891, 3,296. Percentage, plus 13.33. Northwest Provinces, 1901, 799. 1891, 792. Percentage, plus 0.91. Punjab, 1901, 4,438. 1891, 4,263. Percentage, plus 4.12. Burma, 1901, 1,228. 1891, asterisk, no comparison possible. Percentage, asterisk, no comparison possible. Total native states, 1901, 63,181. 1891, 66,050. Percentage, minus 4.34. Total all India, 1901, 294,266. 1891, 287,317. Percentage, plus 2.42. General Foster on Mexico. Honorable John W. Foster has been contributing to the New York Tribune a series of very pointed papers on the condition of Mexico of today. General Foster began his distinguished diplomatic career in 1873 as the United States Minister to Mexico, where he represented his nation for 7 years. Until this winter, he had not revisited the country in the 20 years since his recall. In the meantime, he has been the United States Minister to the courts of Russia and Spain, and held the highest diplomatic office in the United States, that of Secretary of State. Instead of geographic isolation, Mexico is now bound to the United States by the iron ties of 4 railroads, while many steamship lines ply between Vera Cruz and foreign ports. Security of life and property is now assured. The evidences of progress and prosperity are seen on every hand. Mexico, the capital city, has doubled in numbers, and in its conveniences and wealth-bringing attractions may vie with the great cities of the continent. In its foreign relations, Mexico has risen to a position of dignity and gained the respect of all nations. A marked feature of the recent diplomatic relations of Mexico has been the extension of these relations to the Far East. Several years ago, a treaty of amity and commerce was effected with Japan, and missions are now maintained at the two capitals of both governments. Last year, a similar treaty of a very liberal character was signed at Washington by the Mexican ambassador and the Chinese minister. By it, Chinese laborers are admitted into the country, and they are already coming, especially to the Pacific coast, in considerable numbers, and by their industrious and persistent habits are making themselves felt as an important element of the country. To the able management of affairs by President Diaz, Mr. Foster attributed the prosperity of the country. The result of the President's good judgment is especially evident in the present confidence in the financial condition of the country, both official and private. The revenues, which before the election of General Diaz had been barely $20 million annually, soon doubled, then trebled, and within 10 years had increased more than sixfold, reaching as high as $120 million. This increase made possible the abandonment of the old system of taxation of goods passing from state to state, and of taxes collected at the city gates on all articles of consumption entering the city. By this reduction in the branches of taxation, the national revenues have diminished to $60 million, which is sufficient for all the current needs of the government, and yields a surplus to be expended for special purposes. The entire indebtedness of the Republic amounts to about $177,178,000, borne by about 13,570,000 souls. Mexico's debt per capita is thus only $13, while that of Canada is $71. Exploration during Victoria's reign. A perusal of General A. W. Greely's able article shows that nearly all the enormous advances in geographic knowledge during the past 100 years were made during Queen Victoria's reign. In 1837, Livingstone was attending medical and Greek classes in Glasgow, and Stanley had not been born. Victoria had reigned 16 years before McClure, in 1853, attained the Northwest Passage, and 43 years before Nordenskjöld, in 1880, solved the problem of the Northeast Passage. Sir James Ross, Wilkes, Weddell, and D'Urville all won their Antarctic laurels within her reign. Australia was not crossed from north to south by Stuart till 1862, 25 years after her accession, and from east to west by Colonel Warburton till 1873, 36 years after her accession. Hugh, the explorer of Tibet, Pumpelly and Richthofen, pioneers in China, and the Velskoy, who ascended the Amur from the sea, gained their fame within Victoria's reign. Fremont, Powell, Dahl, names illustrious in the exploration of the American continent, also did their work since 1837. From her accession, Victoria was patron of the Royal Geographical Society, and to her encouragement are due many of the great enterprises planned and successfully carried out by the Society. She was ready also to reward the work of British explorers, James Ross, Leopold McClintock, John Franklin, Samuel Baker, Robert Schomburgk, Henry M. Stanley, and others. She knighted in recognition of their achievements. The Founders Medal and the Patrons Medal, awarded annually by the Royal Geographical Society, were granted by her. Phenomenal increase in population of Italy. The population of Italy has practically doubled in the last 20 years, a rate of increase that surpasses that of all nations of Europe and even the United States. This, too, notwithstanding the burdens of excessive taxation that would tend to diminish the birth rate. The last census was taken 20 years ago, in 1881, and showed a population of 21 million. According to the census taken early this year, the population now numbers 35 million. It is safe to estimate the number of emigrants during the 20 years as at least 5 million, so that the increase by birth has been about 20 million. It has taken the United States 30 years, aided by 12 million immigrants, to double its numbers. U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. 15 young Filipinos will soon be selected by civil service examinations in Manila as aides in the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey. They will probably be brought to the United States for a preliminary training at the head office in Washington before being assigned to active work in charting the rivers and harbors of the islands. They will be paid $720 a year, a very generous salary in the Philippines, and clever young Filipinos will undoubtedly be secured. The experiment, initiated by Dr. O. H. Titman, superintendent of the survey, is of great importance, as it is the first step to interest, train, and identify the young Filipino in the scientific development of his country. The coast of southeastern Alaska has been well charted by parties of the survey during the past several years, but the approaches to this section have remained unmapped. This summer, the Pathfinder and MacArthur, in charge respectively of J.J. Gilbert and F. Westdale, will carry survey parties to these channels, and soundings will be taken to accurately determine them. A large party will work in Prince William Sound, while several vessels will carry other men westward to tackle the difficult problem of charting the many channels between the Fox Islands of the Aleutian Archipelago. Glacial action in Australia. The evidences of glacial action in Australia during Permo-Carboniferous times are discussed by Professor Pennock in the Zeitschrift of the Berlin Gesellschaft für Erdkunde, and compared with traces of simultaneous action in India and South Africa. The hypothesis of a shifting of the South Pole to a central point on the Tropic of Capricorn in longitude 86 degrees east does not satisfactorily account for the geographical facts and the existence of glacial conditions over such an enormous area. Professor Penck is quoted in Nature as saying that the appearances ascribed to ice action present in each case certain features not characteristic of ordinary glacial deposits. The deposits are stratified and the pebbles are faceted in the manner first described by Wynne. He further observes that the Gondwana beds, always closely associated with these boulder deposits, have lately been found in the Argentine Republic, and he compares the bedding and faceting with conditions induced by pressure observed in the Nagelfluh and in certain localities near Vienna. While many of the observed facts appear to indicate glacial action, still he thinks that these special points demand investigation. The Northwest Boundary. It is well known that the boundary between the British possessions in North America and the United States, from Lake of the Woods westward to the Pacific Ocean, was long a matter of dispute. Everyone knows, too, that after the controversy had given rise to threats of war, the 49th parallel was agreed upon by both governments as the dividing line. So, as represented upon the map, the whole question seems settled. Nevertheless, there are many persons along this line to whom nothing indicates whether they are living in the territory of the King or of the Union. During 1872 to 76, a joint commission erected 388 boundary monuments along the line about 2 miles apart, but they hardly proceeded farther west than the Rocky Mountains, and left the 410 miles between the mountains and the Strait of Georgia almost unmarked. To survey and mark out this far northwest boundary, an expedition is now being organized by the Geological Survey at the direction of the State Department. It is probable that the Canadian authorities will cooperate with the Americans in definitely indicating the exact boundary. Much of this region is still without roads and trails. The work will be difficult, as it must be prosecuted in part through the wildest region of the Rockies and Cascades, where impassable streams and lofty cliffs make direct advance impossible. The necessary surveys will require 3 or 4 years. After the work is completed, it must be approved by a treaty between the British and American governments, describing in detail the location of this part of the northwest boundary and the monuments by which it is indicated. Mr. E. C. Barnard, the well-known topographer of the U.S. Geological Survey, will run the line in cooperation with Mr. C. H. Sinclair of the Coast and Geodetic Survey. Messrs. Bailey Willis, F. L. Ransom, and G. O. Smith accompany the party as geologists to study the geology of the country in the vicinity of the dividing line. Suspension Railroad in Germany. A suspension railroad of novel construction has recently been opened at Elberfeld in Germany. It is about 8 miles in length and runs through the towns of Barmen and Elberfeld, following the course of the river Wupper. The up and down lines have only a single rail apiece, supported by an iron framework of a kind hitherto unknown in railroad engineering. Each car hangs from 2 supports 25 feet apart, fitted with double wheels which run upon the overhead rail. These supports are so shaped that it is believed to be impossible for them to leave line even though an axle or a wheel should break. The motive power is electricity, supplied by a wire attached to the rail. Each pair of wheels is operated by an electric motor controlled by a motorman in the front car. The railroad is the invention of the late Herr Eugene Langer of Cologne, who died in 1895. The chief advantage claimed is cheapness of construction, for the line can be built over public roads and rivers where no ground need to be purchased. Cape to Cairo Telegraph. Work is progressing on the telegraph line from Cairo to the Cape, although little has been heard about it of late owing to the war in South Africa and the great distance from civilization the engineers have penetrated. The lines of poles and wire now stretches 3,000 miles up from the Cape to a point 50 miles north of the town of Kasanga, on the shore of Tanganyika in German East Africa. Only 1,200 miles remain between Kasanga and the southern end of the Egyptian telegraph line. This last link will be traversed more easily as the apparatus and supplies can be brought by water instead of by native porters. Porters have to be continually engaged as the men refuse to go more than a few hundred miles from their homes. Horses, mules, and cattle cannot be employed as they cannot survive the bite of the tsetse fly. The country just traversed between Lake Tanganyika and Salisbury is the hardest bit of ground to be met with, for it is mountainous, heavily wooded, and malarious. Mr. E. S. Grogow, the explorer, reports having seen engineers supervising the work from litters while racked with fever, and the thermometer standing at 104 degrees. The rinderpest and the war with the Matabelles which followed also delayed the work. The Matabelles misunderstood the white man's motive in killing their apparently well cattle, but which were really infected with the disease, and in revenge tore down miles of telegraph poles and melted his wire into bullets, which they fired back at him. In this war, $200,000 worth of the company's supplies were destroyed. They have had less trouble than was expected from wild animals. Sometimes, to be sure, elephants have knocked down the poles, and once a lion helped himself to several natives before he was killed. German submarine cable system. A vast system of submarine cables is being projected by Germany. In October 1900, a line was opened connecting Kiaochou with Chifu, and the southern end is now being rapidly extended to Shanghai and Canton. Later, a branch cable will be laid from Kiaochou to Nagasaki to connect with the American Pacific Cable, which is destined to be soon constructed, while the main cable will be continued to Manila, Sumatra, Borneo, New Guinea, and the Caroline Islands. From the Azores, a line will be laid southward to the Cape Verde Islands, thence down the Atlantic to the South American continent to Bahia, Rio de Janeiro, and Montevideo. On the other side of the Atlantic, a German cable will unite Morocco, Guinea, the Cameroons, and the German Southwest Africa. When the construction of the system has been completed, the German Emperor will be able to communicate with his possessions in every quarter of the world, independent of English lines. His messages will cross the Pacific and American continent on American cables, and the Atlantic on the German New York Azores Emden line completed last year. Great Britain in the Yangtze Valley. Nothing is more noticeable than the decay of British influence in southern China during the last 5 years. It is not merely that British influence has declined, but that the influence of other powers has largely developed in a region supposed to be distinctively the British sphere. Says the Shanghai correspondent of the Times in a recent letter, the Yangtze is steadily growing less and less English and more international. He fortifies this statement by discouraging facts observed in Shanghai and Hankow, the key of the upper Yangtze. He says the one advantage we still possess over the other powers in the Yangtze Valley is the confidence and goodwill of the better classes among the peoples and officials of central China. But he concludes, British influence in the Yangtze Valley, as in the rest of China, is relative to that of other nations, not an increasing, but a steadily and rapidly diminishing quantity. Sir Archibald Geikie, who retired in March from the head of the British Geological Survey, was born in Edinburgh 66 years ago. His whole life has been spent in geologic work. When barely 30, he was appointed director of the Scottish Geological Survey, and later held the chair of geology in Edinburgh University. In 1881, he was chosen Director General of the Geological Survey of the United Kingdom, and 10 years later was knighted in appreciation of his work. James Geikie, whose name is perhaps better known in America, is the younger brother of Sir Archibald. J. Harris Teal, the well-known writer on geological subjects, has succeeded Sir Archibald Geikie as Director General of the British Geological Survey. An Austro-Hungarian floating exposition leaves Trieste in May for a 15-month voyage around the world. It is deemed impracticable for more than one ship to take part in the enterprise, as the trip is an experiment. New York, San Francisco, Yokohama, Shanghai, Singapore, Batavia, Calcutta, Madras, Aden, and Suez will be visited. Firms that send exhibits are charged $1,000 for each person and $200 for every cubic meter of space or per ton weight. U.S. Weather Bureau. After July of this year, the number of forecast districts of the U.S. Weather Bureau will be increased by the addition of Boston, Galveston, and Denver as centers of new districts. The United States is now divided into 4 districts, each with a center, at which the forecast for that particular district is made. These centers are San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Chicago, and Washington. By the division into smaller districts, greater efficiency will be attained. An earthquake occurred in Spain on February 10th, which did considerable damage in Grazalema, a town of 10,000 inhabitants situated in a hilly district of the province of Cadiz, about 70 kilometers nearly due north from Gibraltar. Several large buildings, factories, and mills, as well as the Church of St. Joseph, were severely injured. Senor Augusto Aramis, writing to Nature from the Central Meteorological Institute of Madrid, says that the body of water that provided motive power for the machinery in one of the factories has disappeared. British Yukon Telegraph. It has been stated with apparent certainty that the 2 British parties constructing the telegraph line from Quesnel to Atlin, who are working toward each other, the first from Quesnel northward and the second from Atlin southward, and at the halfway point, instead of meeting, found themselves on opposite sides of an impassable mountain range 60 miles across. Atlin connects with the United States lines uniting Cape Nome, Dawson, and the military posts of Alaska, while from Quesnel wires run to the great continental systems. In Jamaica, an African language is still spoken among the Maroons, the descendants of wild Negroes who escaped from slavery during the early days of the slave trade. According to Major J. W. Powell of the Bureau of American Ethnology, this language belongs to the Congo region. The Maroons of Jamaica seem to be in a barbarous or semi-civilized condition, resembling in this respect our North American Indians, and, like the Amerinds, they are confined to reservations where they still preserve many of the customs and traditions of their savage ancestors. The recent census of Vienna shows that in Austria, as in Germany, there is taking place a very rapid increase in city populations, due in large part to immigration from the rural districts. Vienna has now 1,635,647 inhabitants and has increased in population during the past 10 years 21.9%. Vienna now ranks fourth among the European capitals, London, Paris, and Berlin exceeding her. London and Berlin are increasing at a faster rate. Of American cities, New York and Chicago outrank Vienna in numbers, and each is increasing more rapidly. New York 37.8% and Chicago 54.4% in 10 years. The U.S. Board on Geographic Names held no meeting during March. By act of Congress, a second edition is being printed of the volume containing all the decisions of the board up to January 1, 1900. Copies of the report may be obtained by applying to Marcus Baker, Secretary of the Board, U.S. Geological Survey, Washington, D.C. Geographic Literature. Newest England by Henry Demarest Lloyd, illustrated, octavo, pages 387. New York, Doubleday and Page. Mr. Lloyd ably traces the development of those forces in New Zealand which have given pensions to the old and have made government monopolies of life and accident insurance and also of railways and telegraphs. He describes the government and people as the least bad this side of Mars, i.e., they are not perfect, but no others are as good. The relatively enormous public debt, $300 for each man, woman, or child, a per capita debt which in this country would amount to $22 billion, and the consequently decreasing birth rate are two grave facts which Mr. Lloyd overlooks. An Old Indian Village by Johann August Uden, Augustana Library Publications, No. 2, Rock Island, Illinois, 1900. Although the author of this interesting brochure lays no claim to special skill in archaeology, his work may well serve as a model to local archaeologists throughout the great area covered by the Mississippi drainage system. The scene of the explorations conducted by Professor Uden at intervals during 7 years from 1881 is Paint Creek Valley, a mile and a half south of Smoky Hill River in McPherson County, Kansas. The village remains consisted of 15 low circular mounds from 20 to 25 feet in diameter, without particular order of arrangement and covering an area of about 20 acres. The average height of the mounds is about 2 feet, while some rise only very slightly above the surface of the prairie. Excavation revealed axes, metates, manos, flakers, pipes, knives, and scrapers of stone, and awls, hoes, beads, gouges, and other objects of bone. Bones of numerous animals, fishes, and the wild turkey, as well as the valves of freshwater clams, were also found during the excavations, indicating that the former occupants of the site gained a livelihood by hunting as well as by agriculture. Perhaps the most interesting object unearthed from the Paint Creek village, certainly the most interesting from the historical and geographic points of view, is the piece of chain mail illustrated in the volume, but unfortunately since lost. The definite origin of this relic of early Caucasian exploration is not known, but as the field of Professor Uden's researches was unquestionably a part of the province of Quivira, which the famous expedition of Francisco Vasquez Coronado penetrated in 1541, and which led to similar expeditions into the same locality during the succeeding half-century, the relic is in all likelihood of Spanish origin. The province of Quivira was inhabited in the 16th century by the Wichita Indians, who later occupied an extensive area southward in the present Oklahoma, whence the name of the Wichita Mountains and of Washita River. They were the only Indians of the plains who lived in grass houses, such as Coronado's chroniclers describe as having been seen in the Quivira region, the Pawnees occupying earth lodges and other plains tribes portable teepees of buffalo hide. We may therefore assume that the Paint Creek village was inhabited by the corn-raising and buffalo-hunting Wichitas, as the relics would seem to show, and probably during the Coronado period, or at any rate during the time of one of the immediately succeeding Spanish expeditions from New Mexico, as the fragment of chain mail tends to prove. Altogether, Professor Uden's work is worthy of high praise. It is regrettable that this will be his last as well as his first paper bearing on topics of this kind. F. W. Hodge. The Romance of the Earth by A. W. Bickerton, illustrated, small octavo, pages 181. New York, The Macmillan Company, 1900, 80 cents. As indicated by the title, the author aims to describe the past and present of the earth in the form of a story. The idea and its execution are capital. The author naturally has not adhered strictly to the limits of known science. Where human knowledge can throw no light, he permits himself to speculate, to make deductions from the accepted laws of nature, in order that no chapters in the romance may be missing. The book is instructive and interesting, and especially valuable to stimulate younger minds to learn more of the great romance of the earth. The Philippines, The War and the People, by Albert G. Robinson, pages 407. New York, McClure, Phillips and Company, 1901. The volume consists of letters written by Mr. Robinson to the New York Evening Post while he was staff correspondent for that journal in the Philippines. Mr. Robinson is inclined to believe that development in the islands would be impossible without the patient, submissive, industrious Chinaman, who is a sort of necessary evil. The book contains much valuable information about the islands and their people, though it is doubtful if many Americans will agree with the author's pro-Filipino tendencies. Especially interesting chapters are The Moros of Mindanao and The Moros of Sulu. End of section 4.
Section 5 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Proceedings of the National Geographic Society. Popular Meetings. March 1, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Mr. Gilson Willets delivered an illustrated address, The Recent Famine in India. March 15, 1901. Vice President McGee in the chair. Mr. H. L. Bridgman, Secretary of the Perry Arctic Club, and Dr. Frederick A. Cook of the Belgian Antarctic Expedition delivered illustrated addresses on the two ends of the earth, Perry and the North Pole, and the cruise of the Belgica in the Antarctics. March 29, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Mr. Alexander Hume Ford delivered an illustrated address, The Railways and Waterways of the Russian Empire. Afternoon meetings. March 5, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Talcott Williams, LL.D., delivered an illustrated address, Western Asia. March 12, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Honorable John Barrett delivered an illustrated address, Eastern Asia, China. March 22, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Professor H. Moore Stevens of Cornell University delivered an address, Southern Asia, India. March 26, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Professor Edwin A. Grosvenor of Amherst College delivered an illustrated address, Northern Asia, Siberia. April 2, 1901. President Graham Bell in the chair. Vice President McGee delivered an illustrated address, Asia, the Cradle of Humanity. Announcements. The annual reception of the Society will be held on Friday evening, April 12th, in the parlors of the Arlington Hotel. Mr. Paul du Chaillu will be the guest of honor of the Society and will give some reminiscences of his travels. A regular meeting of the Society will be held in the large hall of the Cosmos Club at 8 o'clock Friday evening. April 19. All members resident in Washington are urged to attend, as important proposed changes in the bylaws submitted and recommended by the Board of Managers will be acted upon. Object of proposed change in bylaws. The Board of Managers submits and recommends to the Society important amendments to the bylaws. The proposed changes are so numerous that, for the sake of simplicity, the Board offers an entire set of revised bylaws to replace the existing bylaws. Members who wish to note in detail the modifications proposed can do so by comparing the draft which follows with the existing bylaws as printed in the magazine, Volume 9, pages 414 to 416. The general tenor of the changes is set forth in the following paragraphs. In an address read to the Board of Managers, June 1, 1900, and printed in the magazine for October, Volume 11, pages 401 to 408, President Bell advocated various changes in the policy of the Society for the purpose of making its character more truly national. The revised bylaws now offered embody one of the more radical of these changes. At the present time, the Society has active members residing chiefly in the District of Columbia and corresponding members residing chiefly in other parts of the United States. The dues of active members are $5, of corresponding members $2. Both classes receive the magazine. Active members have, in addition, various other privileges, including that of attending lectures. Thus constituted, the Society is not national in its active membership, but only through its corresponding membership. It is now proposed, 1. To merge the grades of corresponding member and active member into the single grade of member. 2. To fix the dues for all at $2. 3. To treat lecture courses, whether in Washington or elsewhere, as local privileges to be paid for by those who are benefited. The proposed bylaws include many minor changes, which seem to the Board desirable if the general change in organization be adopted. The more important of these are 1. The enlargement of the Board of Managers by the addition of members not residing in the district. 2. The creation of an executive committee for the transaction of current business. 3. The restoration of the fiscal year to coincidence with the calendar year. 4. The omission of Section 8 of Article 4 with reference to managers who are continuously absent from meetings of the Board. They include also a number of changes not specially related to the general change in organization. The more important of these are 1. The substitution of the single office of Secretary for the two offices of Recording Secretary and Corresponding Secretary. 2. The omission of the requirement that the Secretary and Treasurer be selected from the Board of Managers. 3. The making more stringent the rules with respect to arrearage of dues. 4. The reduction of the quorum of the Society from 25 to 20. 5. The provision that official notice of proposed amendments to the bylaws may be given through the magazine. The amendments will come up for action at the regular meeting to be held April 19. A. J. Henry, Secretary. Proposed bylaws. Article 1. Name. The name of this society is the National Geographic Society. Article 2. Object. The object of the society is the increase and diffusion of geographic knowledge. Article 3. Membership. Section 1. The society shall consist of members and honorary members. Section 2. Members shall be persons interested in geographic science. Section 3. Honorary members shall be persons who have attained eminence by the promotion of geographic science. They shall not be members of the corporation, nor shall they vote or hold office. Section 4. The election of members and honorary members shall be entrusted to the Board of Managers. Article 4. Officers. Section 1. The administration of the society shall be entrusted to a Board of Managers composed of 24 members, 8 of whom shall be elected by the society at each annual meeting to serve for 3 years, or until their successors are elected. Of the 8 members elected at each annual meeting, not less than 4, nor more than 6 shall be residents of the District of Columbia. A majority of the votes cast shall be necessary for election. Section 2. The Board of Managers shall elect annually from their own number a president and a vice president, and shall elect annually a treasurer and a secretary. Section 3. The president shall preside at the meetings of the society and of the Board of Managers, or may delegate this duty. The president and the secretary shall sign all written contracts and obligations of the society. Section 4. In the absence of the president, his duties shall devolve on the vice president. Section 5. The treasurer shall have charge of the funds of the society under the direction of the Board of Managers, and shall make collections and disbursements, and render an annual report, and his accounts shall be audited by a committee of the society, not members of the board, annually and at such other times as the board may direct. Section 6. The secretary shall record the proceedings of the society and of the Board of Managers, conduct correspondence, and make an annual report. Section 7. The Board of Managers shall fill vacancies arising in the board. Section 8. All officers shall serve until their successors are chosen. Article 5. Committees. Section 1. The Board of Managers shall select annually from its own number an executive committee. Section 2. There shall be standing committees on publications, communications, admissions, research, and finance, whose chairmen shall be members of the Board of Managers. These committees shall be appointed immediately after the annual election of the president to serve until the successors are designated. Section 3. The committees of the society and of the Board of Managers shall be appointed by the president, except when otherwise provided. The president shall be a member ex officio of every committee. Article 6. Finances. Section 1. The fiscal year of the society shall begin on the first day of January. Section 2. The annual dues of members shall be $2, payable in January. Section 3. Annual dues may be commuted and life membership acquired by the payment at one time of $50. Section 4. Members whose dues remain unpaid on March 1 shall be notified by the treasurer that unless the dues are paid within 1 month, they will be in arrears and not entitled to vote at the annual meeting, to receive the publications of the society, or to purchase lecture tickets on members' terms. Members 1 year in arrears shall, after formal notification, be regarded as having withdrawn from the society. Section 5. The funds of the society may be invested, and loans may be negotiated in the interests of the society, and any other financial business germane to the purposes of the society may be transacted by the Board of Managers. Article 7. Meetings. Section 1. Regular meetings of the society shall be held on alternate Fridays from November until May. Section 2. Special meetings may be ordered by the Board of Managers or called by the President. Section 3. The annual meeting shall be held in the District of Columbia on the second Friday in January. Section 4. 20 members shall constitute a quorum. Section 5. Regular meetings of the Board of Managers shall be held on the same days as the regular meetings of the society. Special meetings may be held at the call of the President or on notice signed by 5 members of the Board, provided that for any of its own meetings the Board may substitute meetings of the Executive Committee. Section 6. Lectures and lecture courses may be provided by the Board of Managers. Free admission to such lectures shall not be a prerogative of membership, but tickets shall be sold to members on more favorable terms than to non-members, provided that each life member who acquired life membership prior to the year 1901 shall be entitled to 2 admissions to each lecture and course. Article 8. Publications. The Society shall publish a journal or periodical under the title The National Geographic Magazine, which shall be sent to all members of the Society not in arrears, and may be placed on sale. Article 9. Amendments. These bylaws may be amended by a 2/3 vote of the members present at any regular meeting, provided the proposed amendments are reported by the Board of Managers, and provided that notice thereof has been sent to all members of the Society not less than 10 or more than 60 days before the meeting. The publication of proposed amendments in the National Geographic magazine shall be deemed a notice within the meaning of this article. End of Section 5. End of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 12, April 1901.